All right, our guest is here. He is waiting in the wings, and he is standing by. He does a great job covering the Cincinnati Bengals, and it is my honor, pleasure, and privilege to welcome in Mike Petraglia of CLNS Media. Mike, I appreciate you making some time. Can you hear me? And I appreciate you stopping by here before Thanksgiving.
I can hear you loud and clear, Stone. Hopefully I'm coming through likewise.
You are. It's great to have you, and certainly appreciate you stopping by here on the show to talk some Cincinnati Bengals. And there's lots, of course, that we need to discuss here with this team. Got to start with the news of the week, of course. Joe Burrow, you guys talked with him yesterday, and I'm watching that press conference, and in my opinion, I wasn't really surprised by anything. You obviously have a large portion of the Cincinnati Bengals fan base and even the NFL community there as well, where it's like, well, the Bengals are 3-8. This guy is injury prone. He gets hurt all the time. Sit him down. That's not Joe Burrow. That's not how he operates, and I kind of expected him to handle some of your guys' questions very similarly to how he did. What were just some of your general takeaways from what he had to say yesterday?
Well, I think that's just it, Stone. Joe Burrow wants to play football. I wrote about that this morning in my column, that if you think Joe Burrow for a second was going to hesitate and worry about his sprained big toe on his left foot, his turf toe injury that required surgery, and not worry about trying to help his team get out of the doldrums, you don't know Joe Burrow. And I think it's really important to understand that every opportunity he has to get on the football field to win a football game in the NFL, he cherishes. And that's, to me, what came through loud and clear on Tuesday afternoon when he met with reporters. This is his team. It's important to really understand that Joe Burrow is not just the quarterback, not just the most important player. He's a captain, and he's seen what's happened with the team. One other big takeaway, I would say, Stone, that really stood out to me was him calling out the players, saying, look, people are going to blame Zach Taylor and have blamed Zach Taylor, and certainly Joe is not what's the word I want to say? Ignorant to that. But he thinks that the players need to take more accountability for having a really crappy year and not playing up to the standard that Burrow himself set after back-to-back AFC North championships in 21 and 22. That was another takeaway. I think another takeaway is that Joe Burrow believes that there's still plenty left to prove in this season. He doesn't think that these are exhibition games. He thinks that, one game at a time, but this team can still show that it's going to be a factor in the AFC North.
Joe, at the beginning of his career, when the Bengals were having a lot of success going to the Super Bowl, like you mentioned, he kind of went out of his way to say, you know what, I love Zach Taylor, and I hope he's the coach here throughout the entirety of my career. And I've kind of always wondered, the past couple of years, it hasn't been, the best. They haven't been winning a ton of games. I've always wondered internally if he still kind of thought that way about Zach Taylor. And as you mentioned, he went out of his way to sit there and basically back the coaching staff. I don't know if he necessarily mentioned Zach directly, but he was like, yeah, we need to go out there and play. There's not a scheme in the NFL that's so revolutionary that's going to bail out players. They got to go out there and execute. How do you think he feels about Zach Taylor? Do you still think he wants him to be the head coach for the remainder of his career?
Deep down, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
He understands there's limitations, and he understands that Zach and the coaching staff probably have also need to have their feet held to the fire a little bit. There are some games where the Bengals had the game won, namely the Jets and Bears back-to-back at home, and they lost that game. And, as much as you can blame the defense for not executing in that game, there were times where the players went into the game and they didn't know where they were supposed to be on the field, namely the defense. That's coaching, Stone. Yeah. That is not players not playing up to their standard. That's preparation. That's understanding what late game situations are about. And I think Joe Burrow understands that. And I think when that comes up, certainly Joe Burrow knows that Zach is going to be evaluated by ownership. And if this team does not respond in the final 6 games the right way, there's a very decent chance that Zach Taylor is not the head coach going forward. I will say this, Duke Tobin is not done. Of all the people I blame in the blame pie, Duke Tobin's about 75%, maybe higher. Because he's the one who constructed this roster. He's the one that thought that you didn't need any help in the safety room in the offseason. He's the one that thought it was a good idea not to add to the defensive edge in the offseason, with Trey Hendrickson's future in question, with his contract situation with Shamar Stewart and that contract controversy in the offseason. Unnecessary, but it turned out with the Brown family, the Blackburns, that it turned out to be a big, big factor going into training camp. So Duke Tobin, especially when it comes to building the defense, did not do a good job and has not had good drafts for probably the last 5 seasons, which is not something you want to see.
I asked Paul Daner this last week, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I totally agree. Like, when you're playing the blame game, I think Duke Tobin's at the top of that list. There's a lot of people, whether it be in the fan base or just out there in general, that seem to think that Zach Taylor's got his fingerprints all over these draft picks, which I'm sure it's a collaborative effort, right? They've talked about that at length, and I'm sure Zach provides feedback, and maybe if there's a player he really wants, maybe they take him. But what do you think that process is like on draft night? Because in my opinion, Duke Tobin's calling the shots, and he's swinging and missing.
Well, I mean, let's be very honest here.
Yeah.
Zach Taylor's fingerprints are on the offensive draft picks.
Yeah.
Jermaine Burton. You want to blame Zach Taylor, and certainly the reaction in the draft room on draft night of Jermaine Burton and, Zach pounding the desk and celebrating that pick, and now Jermaine Burton can't get on the field when Jamar Chase is suspended. Come on. I mean, to me, that's an embarrassment. And what makes that even more complicated, and I know I'm going on a divergent path here, but Zach Taylor, I don't think, if he's not going to play Jermaine Burton, then they ought to cut Jermaine Burton. Right. Well, Mike Brown doesn't want to cut Jermaine Burton because he feels there's an obligation to a draft pick to see him through the very end, and especially when he's a high-round draft pick, like a third-rounder, which is a second-day pick, you stick with the pick until the very, very end. And I don't understand the organizational philosophy there. But going back to the original rant, I do believe that Zach Taylor has his fingerprints on the offensive picks, not on the defensive side of the ball. That's Duke Tobin. That is the scouting director. Certainly, you have to look in that direction. You'd have to look at the college scouting, the pro scouting, and that department has to be overhauled. They have missed on Miles Murphy, although he's been good the last couple of weeks. I'll give him that. But you're talking about the third season for a first-round draft pick for him finally to show some signs of production. That's not good enough. And then Shamar Stewart, I guess I will say he's been injured, but there's a lot on the outside, some issues that I think needed to be dealt with Shamar Stewart that weren't dealt with in bringing him into the defense, bringing him into the team, and making sure he understood what his role needed to be. He needed to contribute right away. He needed to be ready right away to contribute, and he wasn't.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because, it was so obvious to all of us that the Bengals, at that number 17 pick in the first round, based on how the defense played last year, they needed a guy to come in and play well right away. And he didn't play well in college. The production wasn't there. I understand he was great at the combine, but as a decision maker, how is that even possible to sit there and roll the dice on a guy at such an important pick when he hadn't done anything?
Here's the Bengals' attitude on that, Stone. The Bengals' attitude is draft to the potential, draft to the athleticism. Don't worry about what he did in college if the numbers weren't there. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, you've got to have production. You've got to have demonstrated ability to get to the quarterback on film. There were indications on film that he could beat his guy, but maybe it took too long to beat his guy to get to the quarterback, and that's why he didn't have sacks. He was a good enough run stopper in college. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think when you saw him in the preseason games, he demonstrated that. I think when you saw him in training camp, he certainly handled he had his moments with Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims where he won one-on-one battles, and that was great to see. So there were signs there that he could win at the point of attack. But getting to the quarterback, he just hasn't been able to show it. Now, he hasn't been able to get on the field. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear, and I understand that very well. But even when he's been able to get on the field the few times he hasn't demonstrated that ability consistently enough. And the Bengals were so desperate for him to show something, and it was just a terrible gamble to take when there were other selections there that could have been made. Or one of my big objections with the way the Bengals handle the draft is just sit where you are, take your pick when you want to pick. Well, if you had a chance to get Malachi Starks, okay, and add to the safety room at a position you were desperate to upgrade, why didn't you do that?
Right.
That's what the Baltimore Ravens would have done if they weren't in their position. But they say, okay, well, if Malachi Starks is there, we'll take him. And they have been able to revamp. And also another thing I'll add: the Baltimore Ravens, they started 1-5, worse than the Bengals. They were willing to make a trade at the deadline and bring in a safety, move Kyle Hamilton to the nickel spot, and look at their defense the last 5 games. Mm-hmm. The Bengals, and I wrote about this several weeks ago, but the Bengals organization is so dysfunctional when it comes to aggressively addressing what the problems are, fixing the problems, and letting their fan base know, especially when you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow. We're not here to win and worry about our salary cap tranche in 2027. We're here to win in 2025 and do our level best to give Joe Burrow a chance to win, and the Bengals just aren't serious about doing that.
No doubt. Mike Petraglia joining us live here on the show, CLNS Media and the Jungle Roar podcast for a couple of more minutes. One more on Joe before we mention Jamar. There's a lot of questions out there about, what's he going to look like, right? Is he going to look like September Joe? Which I think there's enough data out there that would say that, Joe Burrow the first couple of weeks into a new season isn't the same guy that he is this time of the year.
Right.
What's kind of your expectations for his performance on Thursday night? Do you think we'll see like a September Joe or a Thursday or a Thanksgiving Day Joe, whereas if he plays like that, I think the Bengals got a good chance of potentially winning this game?
Somewhere in between. I mean, the fact that he did get 2 regular season starts under his belt, obviously he got hurt in the second quarter on September 14th, but he mentioned this yesterday, that he had a full training camp, he had a full preseason, he got a lot of reps in. I think somewhere in between September and a November Joe is what we're looking at. There's going to be some rust. He is only human, but he has such an ability mentally and I think intellectually to break down a defense, even if it's as good as the Ravens. And he knows the Ravens. He knows how they like to play defense. I think that gives him an advantage. So I think he will be able to certainly make some plays with Jamar Chase in there. Not having T, that does hurt Joe as well as the Bengals offense in general. So he's going to have to adjust for that. The other thing that I think he has that he hasn't had in years past is a solid running game. Chase Brown is starting to look like a top-tier running back in the National Football League. That's going to help Joe Burrow Thanksgiving night. I think it's going to help him a great deal.
Let's talk Jamar. Obviously suspended for the game last week against New England. He issued an apology on social media. I kind of was surprised that he did. I'm sure, maybe his agent or potentially people within the Bengals organization were encouraging him to perhaps do that. Thought the tone in the apology and the tone that he was using with you guys at the press conference maybe was a little bit different yesterday. But
it definitely was different.
What was kind of your reaction to that? Obviously didn't mention Jalen Ramsey by name. Very clear.
No.
He's got no love for him, but just your reaction to the post and I guess how he handled your guys' questions yesterday.
Well, I think you were spot on. The post on IG was thorough.
Yeah.
It was, I think, genuine. I think it was heartfelt. I think he addressed a number of things in that IG post, namely apologizing to the community, apologizing to the NFL community, to the Bengal fans, to the Cincinnati community. But what I thought was really interesting, he apologized for messing down, or how did he say, messing up on his name?
His name, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was a way of saying, I know there are a lot of fans out there who regard me in very high regard, and my family and friends who look at me as someone very important, and I messed that up. I messed up that name with my dad, Jimmy, and that bothers me. Mm-hmm. I think that really bothered him, that he did that, and certainly it impacted, I think, his family, so he apologized for that. But then on Tuesday, you could tell there was still some bitterness there with regard to what it appears Jalen Ramsey was able to get away with. And I think him saying that every man has his limits on the field and this suspension doesn't change that is a very clear message. Don't be doing that again to me on the field. So that's the way I read it on Tuesday. When you saw him face to face, he was a little more somber, but when you read the IG post, I think he was a little more complete in his total apology. And I think maybe the IG post comes across a little bit more sincere, but I think it was also important for him to face the music in front of the media. And I thought he did what Jamar Chase always does, and that is he spoke from the heart.
No doubt. Last one for you, Trags. Let's talk about Joe Flacco here, because I said this a couple of weeks ago. It felt like the Bengals, what they were stealing from Joe Flacco, the Bengals defense, just wasn't fair. Like, not even just the city of Cincinnati or even the NFL. Like, if they had won some of these games, the Jet game, the Bear game, he's literally like one of the best stories in sports right now to be able to come over and play immediately, right, against the Packers, new teammates, gut through these injuries there as well. I mean, the AC joint on your throwing shoulder, and then the finger comes out in last week's game. Just unbelievable. But unfortunately, we're going to remember all the losses. And, I know I certainly will remember what he did for this team and this organization. But from a national perspective, probably won't get enough credit for that. What's kind of your take on this Joe Flacco run here over the course of the past few weeks? Because, we bang on Duke Tobin all the time, and rightfully so. But the move to get him was a brilliant one, and it totally worked out.
Great point, Stone. For him to go out and on October 7th swing that deal with the Browns, he had to. Fans wonder, well, why was that so important? Because that locker room was very close to just coming completely apart. And Jake Browning was doing the best he could, but he couldn't drive the ball downfield. And to go out on the field and have no chance to win a football game, like Joe Burrow referenced yesterday, he wouldn't even step on the field if he didn't feel the team had a chance. Well, with Jake Browning, the offense didn't have a chance to win a game. With Joe Flacco, they did have a chance. But then what Joe Flacco did is when he came in and he got banged up, he showed that he still wanted to play. And Zach Taylor has referenced this several times, that Joe Flacco didn't owe the Bengals anything. He could have easily said, you know what, I need to get fully healed before I'm really ready to help you. But Joe Flacco, he knew that Joe Burrow was hurrying himself back, and so he did everything he could to get himself ready to play in every game that he could for the Bengals. And, I thought that Joe Flacco was one of the best stories in terms of a leader that the Bengals could have possibly brought into that locker room. I had a chance to cover him as an opposing quarterback when I covered the Patriots for many, many years back in the 2000s and the 2010s. And the Patriots always respected the toughness Joe Flacco demonstrated on the field and off the field as a leader. And that, boy, when I see him come into the Bengals locker room, I saw that firsthand, up close and personal, and that's what will stick with me about is how Joe Flacco really did his best to prepare himself every week. And it was difficult at times because he was still learning that offense on the fly. He was behind an offensive line that was still getting better when he came in. By the time he left, the offensive line was I think, the strong points of the team and one of the strong points of the offense, believe it or not. That will help Joe Burrow, by the way. But Joe Flacco, grace under pressure and pain. That's what I wrote this week for clnscincy.com, and that's what I think I will remember about the guy.
Totally agree. No doubt about it. Trags, I appreciate you. Tell us all where we can find your column and tell us a little bit about the Jungle Roar podcast there as well.
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity, Stone. CLNScincy with a Y.com. You'll find my column up there right now on Joe Burrow and why it's important for him to return on Thanksgiving night. You can follow all of my locker room interviews. That is on my X page at Trags, TRAGS. And of course, the Jungle Roar pod, Bengals post-game pod during the season, and the Jungle Roar pod in general. That's on my YouTube page, youtube.com/Jungle Roar pod.
Awesome stuff. Mike Petraglia joining us here on a Wednesday. Trags, I appreciate the time. I know it's a busy week. Got to get ready, of course, to cover that game on Thursday. I appreciate you. Would love to do it again. And happy Thanksgiving, man.
You as well, Stone. I hope the background lighting from my hotel room here in Baltimore didn't wash out the picture too much.
Oh, no, it looks great. Thanks, man.
All right, bud. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Mike Petraglia joining us here live on the show.